So I am thrilled to go into this episode today because it's not directly related to wound care, but it has everything to do with wound care and wound healing, should I say. Because today, this episode is all about putting the agency back into the patient's hands. When I say agency, putting the control back, giving the control back to the patient to really take care of their own healing, to be responsible for their own healing so that they can put themselves in the best position to heal from these wounds that may have been there for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, or longer. Because when we start to look at the medical care, the model around this, and going and addressing these wounds, there are so many factors involved that are going on in this patient's body, that's going on in your body if you are potentially one of the folks who has a chronic wound, or maybe you have a family member that does, that go well beyond the dressing that's being put on there, that goes well beyond the debridement that's being done, the grafts that are put in place, because these are only pieces to the puzzle. And it's tremendously important that patients and their family members, individuals like maybe like yourself, understand exactly the steps that you need to take to put yourself in the best position to heal. So I'm really excited to go into the specifics of this, give you some of the background behind it, but more importantly, practical steps that you can take day in and day out, and also understanding what you can realistically expect from taking those steps. Because if you understand the why, if you understand the research that's there, and not to go too deep down the research rabbit hole, but if you can really understand why these are important, and again, none of this is going to blow your mind. I will tell you that. It's pretty much common sense, but I'm going to go into some depth here so that if you understand the reason why, you create a plan, maybe taking some pieces from this here, and you just get started doing some of these things, or you encourage a family member or a patient of yours or a resident in your assisted living facility to start doing these things on a consistent basis, I can guarantee you that you're going to start seeing better outcomes. I can guarantee you that you're going to start feeling better, that you're going to start seeing some progress, and potentially start seeing some healing in these wounds that maybe have not been healing for a very long time. Because I have seen, working in this field for quite some time, the impact that these wounds have, right? And living with a chronic wound, it can be overwhelming. There can be pain associated with this, maybe fear of infection, or fear of maybe amputation, right? If this continues to go down this path. And it's a very real fear that impacts so many folks. And the worst thing that I come across, and it's really unfortunate, is that so many of these folks, and maybe you're one of them, have just lost hope. They feel like maybe there's nothing else I can do. Oh, I've tried everything. This has been here for so long. And it's frustrating. It's a little bit scary. Maybe it creates some anxiety around this. Or maybe you just push it to the back of your mind and say, I'm not going to worry about this anymore because, well, nothing can be done. I can't control it. What happens, happens. And I'm here to tell you that that doesn't have to be the case. There are many things that you can do today to start addressing this. And again, if you are a healthcare professional and you're working with patients, maybe in home health, maybe in the wound clinic, maybe you're a GP or a nurse practitioner that's going out and working with these folks in an assisted living facility, to be able to provide this level of education. And I know that so many of you are doing this, and I get it. I've been in home health trying to work with patients who have had certain habits and behaviors for years or even decades. And to get them sometimes to try and do something a little bit different can feel like an uphill battle. But it's our responsibility as providers, as clinicians, as healthcare professionals, to really facilitate this process where it's easy to understand, where the patient is incentivized and they just get it and they want to follow through on their end of the bargain on what they can do so that they can promote their own healing. Because some of the studies, and I've done a fair amount of research and prep coming into this podcast episode today, because it's something that is super important to me, something that actually really lights me up and I'm excited to talk about. So one of the studies that I read was that self-care, meaning that the patient, maybe this is you, when they participate and when they follow through, they adhere to their program specifically, particularly around wound care, it reduces regular wound care visits and reduces hospital readmissions by up to 25%. So just think about that. If you were able to reduce your risk of hospitalization or rehospitalization due to a wound that you have by 25% or more, simply by following through on some of these simple things today, would you do it? Or would you encourage a family member to do it? And that's what I'm hoping to break through with this chat. So again, the way that I would encourage you to view this, if you're a patient, or maybe you're a healthcare provider that's trying, struggling, working with your patients to try and get them to just follow through on the recommendations that you make. Let them know, or I'm going to let you know, that every little step that you take, and it's not going to be done in one day. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Just consistent action on some of these things. Every step is almost like a victory toward your healing, right? And reclaiming your life. Because here's the reality. When we're dealing with chronic wounds, and I covered some of this in a previous talk. So if you're really interested in the data and the statistics around this, I'll point you to one of the other episodes. But chronic wounds affect 10.5 million. That's a million folks who have Medicare every single year. And the alarming thing is that there's a growing population of those under 65 with disabilities and who are actually experiencing chronic wounds as well. And so this is a massive number. When we start to look at the data around that, 10.5 million folks on Medicare, that's over 16% of the population, of the Medicare population. So it's a massive problem. And when we look at things like what type of wounds are we dealing with, so the common culprits here, your pressure ulcers, diabetic foot ulcers, venous stasis wounds, arterial ulcers, these are the sort of things that we see day in and day out. And they are the common culprits when we're talking about chronic wounds, wounds that just won't go away for a long period of time. And one of the most alarming stats that I read in research is that the mortality rate, the 5-year mortality rate of folks who have diabetic foot ulcers is 31%, which is almost 1 in 3. But it doesn't stop there. What I found, again, as I was kind of digging through the literature here, is that chronic wounds, again, your venous stasis ulcers, diabetic foot ulcers, pressure ulcers, they increase hospitalization risk by 20 times. So 20 times the risk of going into the hospital. Now, I'm not telling you these stats to instill fear, and it's really to bring awareness. And for the folks that are actually suffering with these chronic wounds, it's to let you know that you're not alone. Because there's so many folks who are going through this, and again, this is not unique to you. And I want to be able to share some of these things so that, again, it impresses upon you the things that you actually can do to address this on your own outside of what the healthcare providers are doing to help you. So as we continue to go on, what I want you to know is that if you are a patient, or if you are a person who has one of these chronic wounds, right? You're not just a patient. That's the very first thing here. You're actually a partner, a majority partner in your own healing. And every action that you take counts. So, what we're going to do now, or what I'm going to go through, is 5 simple steps that you can take today, starting today, so that you can really put yourself on the path, put yourself in the best position possible to heal, to create an environment within your body that promotes better healing and gives you better outcomes, has you feeling better, and ideally puts you in a scenario, so let's say when the wound does heal, where you're less likely to develop one again down the road. So let's get into it. Step number one. Number one here is going to be exercise and mobility. Now it seems pretty straightforward, right? You think, oh yeah, we should be getting up and moving and exercising our bodies, but here's why. Right? So when we start to look at exercise, and I'm not saying you have to spend an hour in the gym every day. I know that's impractical for most people, but the exercise itself is going to improve your blood flow, right? It's going to improve the oxygen delivery system into pretty much your entire body, which delivers nutrients, vital nutrients to the wounds to facilitate healing. And especially if you're up and moving around, you are mobile, you're going to reduce pressure on areas like your hips, your heels. And this is critical to be able to offload the pressure on some of those areas that might be most sensitive or susceptible to developing wounds. And if you already have a wound in that area, to be able to spend as little time on that as possible is going to really be critical for your healing. So there was a study done in 2020. It was in the Advances in Wound Care. And they found that regular movement reduced healing time by 15% in venous stasis ulcer patients. So again, that's pretty staggering, right? If you're able to simply just move, improve your mobility, and just incorporate some degree of exercise, it greatly increases your chances of healing, reduces healing time. On another note, exercise is so important when it comes to managing or improving diabetes, right? So we know that exercise lowers your blood sugar, your glucose, and the research shows us that 30.5% of wounds are actually tied to diabetes itself, where sugar or high sugar really impairs your immune response. So again, this is to impress upon you the importance of that exercise and mobility. But this can be overwhelming for some folks. And they say, well, what do I do? Where do I start? What are some of the things that I can do that will be most impactful? And what I would say is, if you're one of these folks who has a wound, consult a healthcare provider, a physical therapist, somebody, and you may already have a PT in there that's telling you to do these things. Myself as a physical therapist, I can hear them, saying this, and you can hear them in the back of your ear, in the back of your mind. And hopefully, you hear my voice too. But have your therapist design a plan, a safe plan specifically for you. And this will be dependent on your mobility status. But let's say that you don't have a therapist in and you want to take control of your own healing. You want to start incorporating more exercise. What I would say is just start where you are. And I know that's a very nebulous general term, but aim for maybe 20 to 30 minutes of some low impact exercise if you're just getting started. And you don't have to do that all at once, right? Maybe that's 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, or 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. You can split that up into sessions. It might be some light walking. It might be cycling. It might be, you're sitting in your chair or in your bed and you're watching TV, and every commercial you're doing some ankle pumps, you're doing leg raises, kicking your leg out in front of you, marching in place, and then really working on your repositioning, standing up and sitting down, standing up and sitting down. And again, ideally you have a professional, a therapist in there that's going to prescribe not just things to do when they're in there with you, but something that you can do every single day. So that is really the key thing here is consistency. You don't need to have a high level of intensity of exercise. You don't need to do it all today. It's to create a plan that you can execute on day in and day out, literally every single day. And maybe it's something that you're able to enjoy. Because if it's something that you don't look forward to, like, oh my goodness, I got to get up and do my insert exercise here because so and so told me to do it, because TJ told me to do it. Well, that's not going to last very long. But building that routine, that habit over time, and it's through consistency. So find something that you enjoy. Maybe it's a nice day, you're able to go out and walk with a family member or your therapist or whoever it is, but something where, again, you're up and promoting that increased blood flow. You're utilizing your muscles in a way that's driving more oxygen, that's driving those nutrients to every part of your body, including the area where the wound is. Because if we can do that, you're much more likely to heal. Without blood flow, that wound is not going to heal, or it's going to take a really long time to do it. So again, if you're able to get up and walk, if you're able to get up and maybe try some heel raises, some up and down from the chair, and finding different things that you can get involved in, make that a habit every single day. If you happen to be in a wheelchair, or even if you're bedbound, or your patient, your family member, your resident is bedbound, that's fine. We can still start where they are. Right? Maybe have them work on the areas that they can move. It might be some torso twists, some leg lifts, some arm circles, right? Some ankle pumps, anything that's going to, one, help them offload different areas of their body, but two, start to increase that blood flow. And if you can do that for 5-10 minutes, come back again later, 5-10 minutes, it's going to be critically important. So the practicality of this is just start where you are. Just begin. If 10 minutes feels too tough, do it for 5 minutes. If 5 minutes feels too tough initially, do it for 2 minutes. Just get started and build a habit of this. And it's not going to feel like a habit initially sometimes. It's going to take some just kind of sucking it up and doing it. But again, if you can find something that's enjoyable, then it makes it a lot easier. And the way that you can gamify this or make it even better is to track your progress, right? Use a notebook, get a little calendar. You have a calendar on you, and go ahead and you have your exercise routine, and you give yourself a big check mark. And at the end of the week, you just give yourself some sort of treat, and you get to go out and have a nice dinner with your family or whatever it is, because you followed through on the commitments that you made to yourself that week. And when you start to do that, not only are you going to increase your what's going on from a cardiovascular standpoint, that'll be improved, your blood flow, your mobility, but you're going to start to feel good that you're the type of person who is following through on the commitments that they make to themselves. And when you do that, it gives you confidence, and it also gives you some momentum, because if you start somewhere, you start there, very simple to do, and you start to see micro improvements with that wound, even with your mobility, with how you're feeling. You'll start to want to maybe take it a little bit further and take that next step. As we start to move into some of these other things that I can suggest, again, that will kind of inspire you, ideally, to continue improving the quality of your health. Because when you have improve the quality of your health, it oftentimes equates to improved quality of life. So that's step one, really straightforward. Step two, now this isn't going to surprise anyone, nutrition. Now, when we're talking about nutrition, things like protein, your micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, your hydration. So again, I think people hear that term and they're like, oh my goodness, not quite sure where to start. How do I even go about this? Oh, I've been eating this way for my entire life. It's going to be a big challenge. And so oftentimes people neglect this piece because it feels like a heavy weight. It feels like something that might be almost impossible to do consistently. So what I want to impress upon you here is how critical at least having an understanding of how nutrition can impact your healing. And this is for wounds. This is for across the board. This is whether you're 10 years old, 20 years old, 50, 80, 90, 100. Your nutrition and hydration have a significant impact on your healing. It is one of the highest factors that will impact that in a good or negative way. So when we start to think about protein, these are your macronutrients, right? You have protein, you have carbohydrates, you have fats. Those are the three macronutrients. Protein is a macronutrient, and you probably hear your nurse, you probably hear your therapist, your doctor saying, make sure you get enough protein, eat plenty of protein. And what does that actually mean? How much protein should I have? How should I incorporate this into my diet, into what I'm eating on a daily basis, where I'm not sitting here like scribbling down, okay, that was 30 grams of protein, that was 50, that was 100. Most people aren't going to do that, right? But we still want to know, well, how much should I have? Where should I get these protein sources from? And, is it even something that I can do consistently on a daily basis? And so what I encourage you to do is say, yes, I'm committed to addressing my nutrition little by little, because I know it's probably going to be one of the biggest factors that impacts my healing. So again, proteins are really the amino acids that are necessary for tissue repair. So you look at that, super critical, right? Without protein, it's almost impossible to grow. It's almost impossible for wounds to heal. And on top of that, right, you look at things like your vitamins and minerals, so like vitamin D, vitamin K, vitamin A, all of these things, right? These are the type of things that when you consume them and it's processed in your body can support collagen formation and also boost your immunity. So again, really, really important. A pretty staggering fact, right, is that 30 to 50% of wound patients actually suffer from malnutrition, meaning that they are not getting the necessary macronutrients, your proteins, carbs, fats, enough calories, and the necessary micronutrients needed to support their body and for it to function optimally. And I saw this so many times when I was out in the field treating, and oftentimes it's many seniors I found just don't have an appetite and they find it difficult to eat. They're just not hungry. And so when that's the case, it's like, oh man, food just doesn't maybe taste the same way. I don't enjoy it as much, or they don't have a taste for the things that they know are going to support their body. And so oftentimes, and we can see these in the statistics, 30 to 50%, right, of wound patients actually suffer from malnutrition. It makes sense, right? These wounds are delayed in healing because the body doesn't actually have what it needs to close that wound. So that's something just to take into consideration. Now, wound patients, and I mean, really anyone, but wound patients specifically, again, if you've got, a diabetic foot ulcer, pressure sore, venous stasis ulcer, arterial wound, these sort of things, it is critically important that you get enough protein. How much is enough? Now, I will put a disclaimer on this. If you suffer from chronic kidney disease or you have other issues, you'll definitely want to consult with your physician to see what is an optimal amount of protein for me. Because in some cases, particularly with chronic kidney disease, too much protein can cause more harm than good. So there is an optimal amount. You definitely need protein, but if you're ingesting too much, it might cause an issue, particularly with chronic kidney disease. But if you do have a wound, ideally the recommendations are that you're having 1.2 to maybe as high as 2 grams per kilogram of body weight in protein daily. And so that's can be as much as 2 to 3 times higher than healthy adults. And we'll go over what that means practically and how to calculate that, because most people aren't measuring themselves in kilograms. Most people aren't looking at the back of the list here and say, okay, that's 15 grams, or taking a little food scale and putting their chicken on top of that and weighing their chicken to know that, all right, this chicken breast that I had is going to be 43 grams of protein, whatever it might be. But we'll go over some practical strategies to implement so that you can figure out, assuming you've had a discussion with your physician and it's okay for you to have this amount of protein, to determine, all right, how much should I have? How do I structure that throughout the day? And how do I do it without driving myself crazy trying to think about all of these things? Because again, if it becomes too overwhelming, you're just not gonna implement it. So some of the other like key nutrients and vitamins that I start to think about when we're talking about wound healing, one of them is going to be vitamin C. So we know that vitamin C can improve collagen synthesis, and if you are deficient in vitamin C, that's going to delay healing by a pretty significant margin. So you think your vitamin C, that's your oranges and other fruits like that that are going to be pretty high in that. And I'll go over foods that have all of these things. Additionally, vitamins and minerals like zinc, vitamin A, vitamin D for sure. Most seniors are deficient in vitamin D. Most Americans are deficient in vitamin D. So to be able to get out into the sun and absorb that, and then oftentimes vitamin D supplements paired with vitamin K can be very beneficial in terms of improving your vitamin D levels. And then lastly, hydration. Now, again, another piece to the puzzle where it's either overlooked or it can be difficult for seniors to get the adequate amount of water or hydration into their system. And there are a multitude of factors why that's the case. Sometimes they're just not thirsty. They don't think about it. It's maybe they're having like sodas or juices or things that are high in sugar instead of water. Sometimes it's if their mobility is not great and they drink a lot of water and they got to get up to go to the bathroom a number of times. Well, I don't want to have to pee 7 times in the next hour because it's really taxing for me to do that. So to be able to have a strategy around hydration, and maybe it's not having it all at once where you have to go to the bathroom, but gradually increasing the amount so your body adapts to that, or their body adapts to that, where they actually are getting adequate levels of hydration. So, in terms of like specific recommendations, I always want to be careful to do that because I'm talking to a pretty broad audience here. And I always recommend talking to your professional, whether that's your physician, or if you have home health out there, and the nurse is able to, or the therapist is able to walk you through this process. But in terms of protein, like what does that actually look like? Right. So 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram daily. That would mean, approximately 80 to 120 grams for somebody that weighs about 150 pounds. So you can kind of do the math on that. Things that, are high in protein, that's going to be your meats. So I would prioritize things like lean meats, like your chicken breast is really good. You have leaner cuts of steak. That can be really good for that as well. So for your own math, if you were to take, say, 3 ounces of a chicken breast, it's about 26 grams of protein. That's pretty good. And it's not too much. It's going to be smaller than your fist. So most people should be able to get that in a meal. And say you did that, I'm probably not going to have chicken breast for 3 meals a day, but breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Let's say you had, 25, 50, 75, that throughout the course of the day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, you're pretty close to where you'd want to be. But you could certainly vary that with things like with eggs or fish. Salmon can be really good, nice source of omega-3s as well. If you want to kind of shift away from some of the meats, some other great sources of protein are going to be your Greek yogurt, lentils. You'd have to eat a lot of lentils for that to be the case, but they have some pretty good. It's a pretty good source of protein as well. And protein shake supplementation. And again, maybe get some recommendations from from your healthcare provider on that. But most of them will have 20 to 30 grams of protein, and you want to take a look on there as well and see, is this something that's also very high in carbs and sugars, or is it a lower carb protein shake, maybe 4 to 12 grams uh, of carbohydrates. I mean, some of the protein shakes, they might have 30, 40, 50 plus grams of carbohydrates, which you may or may not want. So again, if the way that I would encourage somebody to go about this is if, say you're pacing for 3 meals a day, and this might feel like a lot initially if you're not used to eating this much, but aim for 20, maybe 20 to 30, again, depending on your weight. I always have that disclaimer in there, but 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal, again, spread across 3 to 4 meals and snacks. So if you start eating earlier in the day, it makes it very doable. And it is something that most people over time can kind of build up the tolerance for doing. And it's funny, right? Because we're talking, step one was let's exercise, be mobile, work on these things to improve blood flow and your strength and so forth, and then your healing ability. And now you have to really pair those two together, because all the exercise, and you can talk to a bodybuilder, an athlete about this. They can do all the exercise, all the training in the world, but if they don't have the nutrition, they are never going to build muscle. They're never going to grow. They're never going to get to the level that they want. And the same principles apply exactly to folks who have wounds, and really everyone. So if you're putting in all of this work to really implement, say, an exercise and mobility plan, well, now is the time to supplement that, or to really enhance those effects by working on little steps that you can take with your nutrition. And initially, right, it might just be as simple as, I'm only going to focus right now on trying to get of increasing my protein, right? Because if you take an inventory and maybe you're just writing down what you have to eat in a day, that might be your first step. You don't even change anything, just to take notice, become aware of the things that you're eating, and you find that, oh, well, the only protein I had was at dinner, and it was a tiny piece of chicken. The rest of the day was, maybe it was chips, maybe it was toast, some fruit, things like that. And you find, well, one, I'm probably under eating. And this is just an example. And two, there's no way I'm getting even close to the amount of protein that I need. So just start to become aware of that. And then maybe step one for you, just like we talked about with exercises, great. All I'm going to focus on is doing something for 5 minutes every day this week. And then I'm going to increase that to 10. And then I'm going to increase that to 15. On the nutrition side, it might be, well, I'm going to add protein to breakfast this week. And that's going to be the only change that I make. And then I'm going to try and continue to keep track of these things that I'm doing. And then, okay, that becomes a little bit more normal. My body's starting to get used to that. I'm feeling a little bit better. I have a little bit more strength. And then from there, great. Now I'm going to add protein to my lunch too. And so it's these micro steps over time that will have a significant impact. It's the aggregation of marginal gains. So again, I think that when we look at nutrition as this and hydration as this nebulous term, I'm not really sure where to start. The important thing is that you just start, right? And the more that you can simplify this, the more likely you are to actually do it. Because if you don't do it, you're not going to put yourself in an optimal position to heal. So I find that a lot of folks, they like to, in terms of simplification, maybe you like smoothies where you can put in some protein powder, some berries, maybe some spinach, like leafy green vegetables. And that can be, the protein that you're intaking, or the increase in protein that you're taking that week. If you do that on a consistent basis, especially if you like it, right? And it's a really simple way, because once you realize that it doesn't have to be so difficult, such a radical change, it becomes something that you're going to want to do time and time again, especially when you start to notice the changes within your body and especially if you start to see changes, positive changes within the wound itself. So that's what I can say there. That's step 2. And now as we move on to step 3, it's going to be getting away from the exercise and the nutrition, which you would expect. Step 3 is something that I think is often overlooked when it comes to, or it's not immediately associated with wound healing. But I'm going to share some insights for you, and this might set off some light bulbs for you here. Number 3 is mental health and stress management. So you might be saying, "Oh man, how does that relate to healing my wound?" The data shows us that chronic stress can elevate your cortisol levels, and cortisol is a hormone. And when that happens, particularly for long periods of time, right? So we're talking about chronic stress, not just like normal up and down daily, but if you're living in constant stress, this can reduce your collagen formation and actually delay your healing. So if you've got a lot of stress, you're dealing with mental health challenges, that can delay your healing. And most people don't realize that. And the prevalence of depression in wound patients is significantly higher. It's very common. As much as 30% of wound patients actually suffer from depression. And so when we start to put those two things together and say, okay, stress, mental health, depression, what's going on in here actually can impact my own ability to heal. So you often see reports of like isolation, maybe some fear about the wound, that fear, anxiety, stress, right? That stress response is created within your body, particularly when you're worried about this thing. So again, how do we address that? Well, again, just like when we were talking about exercise, we were talking about nutrition, talk to your healthcare professional about this specifically, right? And it's not always just a matter of, oh, okay, we have this medication. We're talking about you as the patient, reclaiming your own agency. How do I take control of this? Realizing that you have the ability to address some of these things. There are resources for you, right? And yes, you want to utilize your healthcare professionals to the most of their ability and your ability, but also bringing that back into yourself, to myself, and say, yes, you know what? This is something that I can address. So there's a ton of studies around mindfulness and social support to be able to reduce stress by as much as 25%. Is what I'm seeing in many of these studies. And then when we can reduce stress through some of these techniques, well, it's going to help improve these wound closure rates. So on the topic of mindfulness, and I come from a physical therapy background. Some of these recommendations, I'm going to give it a high level, but there are really great practitioners out there that address some of these things specifically and might have, and I'll try and find some links to these resources, or maybe it's a YouTube video, maybe it's an app, maybe it's a healthcare professional in Northern Virginia that specializes in this area to be able to work with you specifically on mental health, on stress, on different strategies to address this. On the topic of mindfulness, even just taking 5 to 10 minutes on a daily basis just to do some deep breathing. There's a number of apps that I've used throughout the year. If you prefer to use something on the phone, right? Maybe it's Calm or Headspace, and to have some sort of practice, maybe like a meditation or a mindfulness practice that helps you, again, just focus on your breathing and try and working on muscle relaxation, focusing on your breath, these sort of things to help manage and reduce stress on a daily basis. Now, again, I'll put some of those links in the show notes for this, so that if you want to go deeper into that topic, you certainly can, and some of the resources that I've used throughout the years. Now, in terms of like social support and connection, I always found this interesting that there are certain cultures throughout the world that have the highest longevity when it comes to life, the highest quality of life. And I was always surprised by some of the factors that actually led to that. I thought it would be things like diet and exercise and lifestyle and all of those things, and those are super important. But what I found most interesting is that the cultures throughout the world that have the longest lifespan and the highest quality of life are the ones that where relationships and culture among the community are at the highest level. So people have really good social connections. And I was like, wow, that's super interesting. And the fact of the matter is, especially here in America, we see this with our senior population where they're isolated, they don't have a ton of people around them, or even if they're in an assisted living, they tend to stay in their rooms and they're lacking that social support, they're lacking that engagement, they're lacking that purpose among a community. And believe it or not, this is critical, absolutely critical for promoting mental health and well-being and just giving folks the optimal ability to heal, right? And so you wouldn't initially associate, oh, my relationships and my social connections and this group that I have here with, well, my well-being. But the studies are pretty evident. They're very clear that the two go hand in hand. And so what I would encourage you to do is if you are in an assisted living, right, or your family members in assisted living, encourage them to join the groups that are there. If they aren't already, become active. Maybe find something that they enjoy. Maybe it's a gardening club. Maybe they go and they do word searches, or maybe there's an exercise class, and really have that social involvement because it can do wonders for the senior's mental health. For your mental health, if this is somebody. And if you're at home and you're not in an assisted living, again, what I would say is there's so many resources out there, and I'll try and link some of them here as well, of different things that you can become involved in, right? Or different groups that even if your mobility isn't great and you can't get out of the house very often, to be able to engage in something online, right, with other folks, or to be able to engage in a group, or maybe somebody's coming over to your house. And don't discredit how important that social connection is. So I think that's something that I've overlooked for a long time, but I'm starting to realize how important that actually is. And lastly, I think on this mental health and stress and mental well-being, for that matter, what I found this to be true. I've talked to a number of folks, and there's a lot of studies and research on this too. Is to take some time to journal, but just to maybe take 5 minutes and write some things down, and to be able to just get our thoughts out of our head and to get pen to paper, like actual physical pen to a paper, can be tremendously beneficial. So again, from the top, it's having a mindfulness or meditation practice. Again, I'll have some resources here if you don't know where to start on that. Really getting involved from a social aspect, join different groups that you're interested in. Maybe start some sort of journaling practice, and lastly, do things that are fun, that you enjoy. What hobbies did you used to like or continue to like, and even if these things need to be adapted in a way where it's to suit your mobility or where your status is now, great. If you used to enjoy knitting or music, or I keep saying coming back to gardening, bowling, I don't know, whatever those things are, and ideally in a scenario where there are other folks that you can interact with, fantastic. And again, so we start to put those pieces together and say, okay, it's another little piece to the puzzle on how I can do certain things to help promote my own healing within my body. Because it's really this all-encompassing thing. Again, we're coming back to wound care and wound healing, and very rarely is it the products or the application or the dressing on the wounds itself that are ineffective or not promoting optimal healing. It's oftentimes a scenario where, okay, it's the right dressing, it's the right graft, it's the right X, Y, and Z, but we haven't taken the time to fully address you, the individual, the human being, to implement these simple things that will put your body in an optimal healing state. So that's where I'd go with that one. Step 4, sleep. Now, this is, again, of critical importance, not just quantity, but quality of sleep. Now, when we start to think about that, sometimes we think, oh, maybe I slept 9, 10 hours, but was that actual quality sleep? And so there are a number of things that can actually track this, but I want you to start thinking about this in terms of your healing. And am I getting appropriate quantity and quality of sleep? So how does this actually impact your healing? Well, sleep, good quality sleep actually promotes growth hormone release, and it aids in tissue repair, reduces inflammation. And what we've found is that poor sleep actually can increase your wound complications by up to 20%. And that was in the Sleep Medicine Review, which was done, I think it was published in 2020. So just imagine that. If I'm getting poor sleep, my wound healing and the complications related to my wounds can increase by 20%. That's like 1 in 5. It's crazy. So again, I think just starting to become aware of these things is critically important. Now, again, how much does this actually impact, and to what level of seniors? So what we've seen here is 40% of seniors report sleep issues. And a lot of this is worsened by the pain from the wound. It's worsened from stress and a number of things. And even things like, especially if you have a wound, maybe a sacral ulcer or something that's on, your low back or one of your hips, to be able to position yourself in a way where you're offloading that. Right? We talked a little bit about that in the exercise piece, but be able to offload pressure from the wound is super important. But also from a pain perspective, because it can be very painful if you're laying on that thing and it's keeping you up at night, impacting the quality of your sleep. So in terms of recommendations here, what are the things that we're looking for? You want to aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep nightly. That's a recommendation. And maybe you need a nap during the day, perfectly fine. But you typically want to avoid those later in the day, those naps if you can, because it can actually impact the nighttime sleep that you get. So things that I would recommend to somebody, it's like, how do I improve my sleep hygiene or the quality of my sleep? How do I create an environment and a routine where I can not just get 7 to 9 hours, but 7 to 9 hours of restorative sleep that is going to help my body heal? And so one of those things is going to be creating a sleep-friendly environment. Now, what does that mean? Right. So ideally, if you can get some like blackout curtains or a sleep mask, something to really block out any light that might be coming in. That's going to be something simple you can do. And the sleep mask is one you can get for $10 on Amazon. Or if you don't want to do that, use a sock or use a a pillowcase, something to cover your eyes. That's going to help tremendously with the quality of your sleep. Number 2, the noise in the environment. So if you need to get earplugs or maybe a white noise, a sound machine, which I still use one to this day. I know my kids did for forever and they still do. But to be able to block out noises that might just wake you up slightly during the night or have you rustle, impacting your quality sleep. And additionally, things like the temperature of your room, right? So finding a temperature that's on the cooler side, but comfortable, so that again your body can actually sleep through the entire night, and you're in a scenario where you're not waking up multiple times. And again, we talked about the positioning specifically. So depending on where your wound is, if it's on your heel, propping up your leg in a way where you don't have pressure on that wound, or maybe you're lying on your side. If you do have a wound, say on your sacrum, your lower back, and then you're trying to lay on your back. Well, of course, that's going to cause some issues. There might be some pain, some discomfort that would wake you up in the night. So to be able to lie on your side or put some pillows or different things underneath there so that you can offload that properly throughout the entire night, so you're not waking up. You get restorative sleep. The quality, the quantity is there, and subsequently putting your body in an optimal healing state. So again, I can't hammer this home enough. You can certainly go down the rabbit hole on sleep and talk about that for an hour and specific things, but just start with something, right? And maybe it's just getting an idea of what the quantity of sleep that you have is now. And maybe you have your little journal there. We talked about your exercise. Yeah, I did my exercise. I'm increasing I just added some a protein shake to my day. These little steps, little by little. And then on the sleep side of things, maybe it's like, okay, I went to bed at 10 o'clock last night, woke up at 6 a.m. And then you kind of just journal that down and start to notice some patterns. And maybe you can mark, I feel like I slept well, I didn't sleep well, I slept well. Maybe you give yourself a 1 to 10 on how you feel energy-wise when you wake up, because this will give you some insight into the patterns and the things that are either positively impacting your sleep or negatively impacting your sleep. And if you do that, you say, you know what? The time that I'm going to bed, it varies so much. It's 9 o'clock here, 11 o'clock there, 10 o'clock here, 8 o'clock. That might be something that you can adjust pretty easily. If you know what, I'm going to set a routine. I'm going to go to bed at 9:30 every night. Now you watch your favorite TV show, you read a little book, you go to bed, and you try and go to bed the same time every night. And it's not, again, within reason. I'm not saying you have to be so regimented where there's no flexibility in your schedule, but something like that is really simple and will actually help improve your sleep consistency, your sleep quality over time as you do that. And things like limiting your caffeine, right, after certain times of the day. So maybe 12 o'clock, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, you're like, all right, I'm not drinking any more caffeine. Maybe you're reducing your screen time if you're watching a lot of television right before bed, and it's like, okay, I can't really get to sleep very well after. This way, maybe you shift from 8 to 9 o'clock, you watch your show, 9 to 9:30, you're going ahead and maybe reading a book instead to help you wind down, put your body into a state where it can fall asleep. You've got your eye mask, maybe some white noise, and you're off to the races. But really, it's just about building a routine and recognizing the things that positively impact your sleep quantity and quality, and things that negatively impact that, and try to address it. So that's step 4. Now, on to the last one here, which is going to be step 5. Now, step 5 is super important, and it's not entirely a step, but it's because of how prevalent wounds are with diabetic patients, particularly type 2 diabetes. I wanted to address this kind of in its own step here, and it may be applicable to you. It may not. But this is blood glucose control. And I have like some brackets here around, okay, for diabetic patients, but I think this will be important for anyone really. And this does come back to your nutrition, but I wanted to address this for those with diabetes, because we know that high blood glucose, right, so high sugar, impairs your immune response and your collagen formation, which means your ability to heal goes down. The more that your sugar is uncontrolled, or the higher it is, up, down, it's not in a good range, well, the worse your outcome is going to be, the more likely that wound is going to be there for a longer time, the harder it is to heal. And we know that, the higher your blood glucose is over a longer period of time, it actually can increase your risk for diabetic foot ulcers, in the long term. And so I want to press upon you this. This was a super interesting statistic that I came across. And it's that a 1% reduction in your A1C. Now, if you've had diabetes, you go to the doctor every 3 to 6 months. They do your blood work. You get your A1C. They give you your range. They say, oh yeah, it's good. Oh, it's a little high. Oh, it's here. We want to get that down. But let's just say it's on the higher side, right? And which is likely the case if you have diabetes. A 1% reduction in your A1C can actually improve your healing by 10%. So let that sink in, right? If I just improve my A1C by 1%, I can actually improve my healing. And so this chronic wound, maybe I have a diabetic foot ulcer, right? That's been I've been trying to deal with, trying to address, trying to heal for a long time. If I can improve my sugar, if I can improve my A1C, I'm going to improve, in all likelihood, my ability to heal this thing. So it's pretty wild. The diabetic foot ulcers are extremely prevalent. 25%, right, of all diabetic patients will develop a foot ulcer in their lifetime. That is a massive amount, right? So again, if we can start to implement some of these steps that I was talking about, again, we were talking about the exercise, the nutrition, these little things, little by little. I'm not saying you have to drastically improve your blood glucose overnight or your A1C overnight. I mean, it's not going to be impossible, but you take these little steps over time and you start to see your blood work improving. You start to see your sugar, you start to see your A1C improving, your mobility is getting better. Oh, look at that. My blood pressure is a little bit better. My labs are a little bit better. Oh my goodness, I'm starting to feel a bit. The quality of my sleep is improving. It's this wheel. Start to get some momentum, right? Because everything impacts everything, and the more that you do this, and the more that you're successful with these little steps, the results compound over time. And again, the more likely you are to put your body in a state where you can heal. So again, super important. That's why I wanted to bring up this one specifically. But as you know, if you've been dealing with diabetes for any length of time, you're probably checking your sugars maybe 1-2 times daily, and you have targets, of what that range should be. And it's very easy to tie back to the foods that you're eating. Oh my goodness, I had a glass of orange juice and a bowl of cereal for breakfast, and then oh my goodness, my blood glucose was way up here. So start to really look at those things and say, well, what small change can I make? Maybe I really like my orange juice, or maybe I really like my bowl of cereal, but you know what? I might replace that with with a water and a coffee, and maybe a bowl of fruit instead. And then, I want to make sure I get some protein. I want to maybe increase my fiber a little bit. And so you start to take these little steps so it doesn't feel like a radical change, because radical change right up front is very rarely going to stick, because people feel like it's a complete change from what they've always done and it's just not enjoyable. So it's about those micro changes over time, implementing these little steps here that are going to put you in a much, much better position. So, really, I think those are the 5 steps there. Starting with your exercise and mobility, developing your plan there and executing consistently over time. Number 2, your nutrition and your hydration. Number 3, your mental health and stress management. So things like being part of a social group, the journaling practice, potentially meditation or mindfulness, and then coming back here to things like monitoring your sugar intake and your blood glucose, particularly if you have diabetes. And then lastly, your sleep and the quality of your sleep. So again, this represents, and it's not everything, but it's definitely 5 things you can start to think about, and more importantly, start to implement over time, starting today. Because what I don't want you to do, or your patients to do, is to try and do everything all at once, and then they go full on for 3 days, and then they go back to doing exactly what they were doing beforehand. This is meant to be gradual. It's meant to be, the key word here is consistency. There's nothing exciting or flashy about it. It is truly about consistency and making these changes that compound over time, which ultimately are going to put you or your family member, your resident, your patient, if you're in home health, to give themselves or you the best chance to heal. So that's what I'm going to leave with today. If you found some value in this, if maybe you are a patient that is going to try and implement it, send me a message. I would love to hear about it. If you are maybe a caregiver or a family member, or you are a practitioner, and you think one of your patients would benefit from listening to this, please share it with them. That's all I will ever ask of you, is to share it with somebody that you think would benefit from hearing this information, and more importantly, trying to implement some of this information. So again, thanks guys for listening to the Aging with Innovation podcast here. And if you get the chance to like, subscribe, and share this with somebody that would benefit, please do. I'll be eternally grateful. Thank you.